I want to welcome all of you and those on the webcast to Brookings this morning. I'm sure that most of us can recount our own summer jobs experiences quite fondly. But what I wanted to do was tell a story about what inspired Brookings to come to this topic. Now, last April, more than a year ago, the nation was gripped by the events spurred by the death of Freddie Gray. So was the city of Baltimore. And one of the first things that Mayor Rawlings Blake did was announce an immediate expansion of the Youth Summer Jobs Program. In just a matter of months, the city would provide 8,000 young adults from the ages of 14 to 21 a summer job, which was up from its commitment of 5,000 prior. Employers in the city stepped up, and private and nonprofit organizations like the Annie A. Casey Foundation and the Bank of America Charitable Foundation, which are featured here today, provided considerable contributions to support the program's expansion. Now, Baltimore's announcement reflects the aspirations of many cities and mayors nationwide. The Summer Jobs Program is seen as an important vehicle to help low-income young adults get good work experience, expand their social and professional networks, and be inspired by a future that is different than life on the streets. Indeed, the need is great. Research by our scholars have shown that nationally and in regions across the country, employment rates for young people have yet to recover since the recession. An estimated 3 million young people are neither in school nor in work. And these disconnected youth are disproportionately African American and Latino, and 3/4 of them are aged 20 to 24. And Freddie Gray was 25 at the time of his death. In the Philadelphia metropolitan area, the number of disconnected youth aged 16 to 24 is a staggering 53,700. And we are going to hear from my good friend, Mayor Michael Nutter, in just a moment. So the rationale for youth summer jobs programs is clear, it's compelling, and a good number of cities organize such programs, especially now that there is a federal grant program to support them. But how effective are summer youth jobs programs? Do they live up to the very high expectations we have on them today? What are the most important elements in terms of performance metrics, program design, funding, staffing, that can make these programs effective in providing true career-enhancing opportunities for our young people? So today, my colleague Martha Ross and Richard Kazis, who's a non-resident senior fellow with Brookings, have released a new paper that answers these important, timely, and rather practical questions. Martha will share her findings shortly, and Richard will host a conversation with our panelists to discuss their experience and insights in ensuring that summer jobs live up to their promise. Now, after the panel, we will be taking questions from the audience and from those on the webcast. So those watching today can send us their questions through the Twitter using the hashtag #SummerJobs. Now, before we kick off and begin with the real heart of the program, I did want to thank Allison Gerber and the Annie E. Casey Foundation for joining us today, for supporting this paper and our work overall. And I also want to thank Carrie Sullivan and the Bank of America Foundation for being such passionate leaders in youth employment and for also supporting our work. Now it is my pleasure to hand the reins over to Martha Ross.
Thank you. This has been a very interesting project to work on, and I'm grateful to have had the opportunity. And now with this event, I'm grateful to have the chance to hear from the panelists and from you, the audience, because I have seen this RSVP list, and it is an impressive, knowledgeable group of people. I'd also like to take this moment to acknowledge my co-author, Richard Kazis, who was just a pleasure to work with, and the final paper is much better for his involvement in it. And my last round of thanks, before I get to the meat of this, is for all the people who spoke with Richard and I and shared their knowledge and their insights as administrators, as funders, as policy analysts. There are too many to go through right now, and they're listed in the paper, but I just want to highlight a few. Andrew Moore from the National League of Cities, Keisha Bird from CLASP, and Patty Everett from the Summer Jobs Partnership. And then they provided incredibly helpful guidance working based on their work with communities around the country. And Baltimore was also very candid and helpful and upfront, and I'm very grateful to Jason Perkins Cohen, Ernest Dorsey, and Michelle Miles of the Mayor's Office of Employment Development for helping me understand the on-the-ground perspective and answering what I'm sure were naive questions. So now on to the topic at hand. First, a bit about summer jobs programs. What exactly are we talking about? Summer jobs programs typically last 5 to 7 weeks. They are often about 5 hours a day. They serve primarily teens and high school students, but not exclusively, and they are meant to serve young people who otherwise might flounder in the labor market. Wages are typically subsidized, but not always, and young people are often placed in nonprofits and the government, but also the private sector. They can be operated by a variety of organizations, workforce investment boards, human services and employment agencies. These are some of the most common. They're funded by a mix of sources, local, state, federal, philanthropic, corporate. There's no one right mix. There's a lot of variation. Cities and counties, large and small, do these programs. New York City has about 55,000 participants, which yet still doesn't meet demand. Chicago has about 25,000, also not meeting demand. And then you've got much smaller places like Missoula, Montana, and Charlottesville, Virginia, also doing it. This is across the country. Some organizations operate the programs themselves, and some contract it out to nonprofits. So there's a huge amount of variation. And they've gained increasing attention and investment of late, probably dating back to the 2009 stimulus, which provided the first dedicated federal funding for summer jobs in about 15 years, and then also in response to the reverberations of the events that highlight the need to increase opportunities for young people, especially those of color in distressed communities. And as Richard and I delved into this topic, we used a couple of questions to guide our thinking. First, why do summer jobs matter? This is a fundamental question. I will list some of the reasons why they matter, and then depending on who you talk with, you'll hear different reasons emphasized. First, they improve a young person's future employment prospects. They provide work experience, skill-building opportunities, and a chance to build their networks. By virtue of their age, most young people lack all of these things, but it's also amplified by those of lower socioeconomic status. So in this case, it's serving a workforce development function. They provide constructive activities and promote social behavior. In this case, it's serving as a public safety function by keeping young people busy, quote, off the streets and preventing them from getting into trouble. These touch on some pretty raw and relevant issues in what's going on in cities and distressed communities today. And embedded in those two, and something I was slow, I think, to realize, was that for many parents, these are incredibly important. They want their kids to be doing something worthwhile and constructive in time that would otherwise be pretty unstructured. And especially for those who don't have the resources for summer camps or different kinds of enrichment activities, these can be a lifeline. And then lastly, they also provide earnings to low-income families, and communities. So in this case, it's serving an income transfer function. What do we know about their impact? Are they actually achieving these goals of improving employment and reducing criminal activity and other problem activity? On this, we know less than we'd like. Until fairly recently, there was little research on youth employment specific to summer jobs programs. But new research on programs in Chicago and New York have found that these programs lead to reduced arrests for violent crimes, they reduced incarceration and mortality, and they improved some academic outcomes. This is obviously validating for supporters of summer jobs programs, but it's hard to make broad generalizations about program effectiveness in different contexts with different program designs unless you have a thicker research and knowledge base. And there are still some missing links. The Chicago study finding reduced violence did not find an impact on school attendance or grade point averages, and the New York City study showing reduced incarceration did not find any impact on later employment and earnings. So there's more to do. There are additional studies based on random assignment underway, and I don't mean to imply that localities are blind to the value of data and evidence building, but it's complicated and expensive to conduct research that can point to causality. And when that's not possible, which is usually, some localities are doing some really interesting work to measure their performance and compare the outcomes of their summer jobs participants to demographically similar young people, typically high school students, and that's showing some promising results, and it shows a commitment to data. Last guiding question: how do you run a high quality and large summer jobs program? These programs are harder to do well than most people assume. A successful program rests upon a host of logistical and bureaucratic achievements that are usually unseen and unsung. You need to recruit, register, and prepare youth, recruit, register, and prepare work sites, match youth with appropriate work sites, considering youth interests, the employer's skills and age requirements, geography and transportation, run payroll, monitor the program, and ideally provide guidance, coaching, and or troubleshooting to both the youth and the employers. And then you have to do it at scale. Multiply this by 8,000, multiply it by 25,000. It just gets more complicated. So Napoleon is quoted talking about the centrality of logistics in military campaigns, and it's a slightly odd comparison, but I'd say the same thing about logistics in summer jobs programs. In this case, you're not talking about supply trains to the Russian front, but you are talking about planning and implementing a complex operation involving multiple actors, multiple locations and facilities, and a huge number of critical details. So, based on a theme that you will hear throughout, although there is less research than we like, there is still a lot of knowledge that can be consolidated and used more effectively. So towards that end, Richard and I tried to distill what we had learned from talking to practitioners and our reading into some core elements of successful programs. And as Amy noted, despite the complexity of these programs and the need to strengthen the evidence base, their underlying logic is pretty compelling, which is A, young people need better connections to the work world, and B, let's put them in the work world. And they're riding a tide of enthusiasm and investment. Cities are doing a lot of interesting, creative things, and maybe we can keep this momentum going to expand and improve these efforts in service of the ultimate goal, which is to help young people successfully transition into adulthood. So these should be characterized as best bets rather than definitive, although they do align closely with other research and assessments on the qualities of good summer jobs programs and youth employment programs. So we divided them into two categories. There's program design, referring to the activities that make up a summer jobs program, and the services that the program provides to youth and to employers. And then each of those elements has staffing and organizational implications, which leads us to the second category of how do you operate, how do you execute those program design elements. Now here I'm going to give some examples of what different places are doing, and there's simply not time to describe all of what Richard and I learned, and it's also not possible to catalog all of the interesting things going. So rest assured, I know the universe of good stuff that's happening is larger than what I will be talking about. The first item is recruiting employers and work sites. You can't have a good summer jobs program without summer jobs. Mayors play a big role here. They're the recruiters in chief. Their control of city jobs and their visibility in the nonprofit and the business worlds is critical, and we'll hear more about this on the panel. Part of this is screening the employers and the work sites to ensure that there's at minimum a job description and a designated supervisor. And increasing private sector slots is a focus for a couple reasons. Government and nonprofits have typically provided the bulk of summer jobs, but their ability to generate more has limits. And if you bring in the private sector, you can provide more career exploration activities and increase the likelihood that some positions will be unsubsidized and employer paid, so that you can expand the program without overreaching financially. Next, doing a good match, being a good matchmaker. Many cities have explicit tiers within their programs to serve young people of different ages and different skill levels. So for example, Capital Workforce Partners in Hartford, Connecticut has 4 tiers with service learning for teens aged 14 to 16, at the younger, less experienced end, to both subsidized and unsubsidized internships for older youth. And Work Ready Philadelphia is organized into similar tiers. And some cities have tracks or programs specifically designed for more vulnerable youth, such as those involved with the criminal justice system, or those, and the Chicago research was based on a part of their program that was geared towards youth in high violence high schools. There is a lot involved, a lot that you can teach young people about transitioning into the work world. And places are doing this in interesting ways. In terms of work readiness training, there's no standard curriculum or approach. Some use third-party materials, some build their own. In Massachusetts, the Commonwealth Corporation has developed a Signal Success curriculum, which is used in 15 communities around the state. It provides lessons plans, assessments, and technical assistance. MHA Labs in Chicago analyzed thousands of employer appraisals from summer jobs programs to identify a set of 12 core skills most highly correlated with hireability and employer satisfaction. And then they work directly with partners who are operating summer jobs youth employment programs to develop assessments and feedback forms and other tools that support these skills. And as Chicago's City of Learning initiative, summer jobs participants who earn high ratings on all of these 12 skills can earn a, quote, higher up digital badge. There are also work-based learning plans that Boston has been using for years, and that we'll hear about probably from one of our panelists, because Louisville, Kentucky has adapted it for their own purposes. There's a lot happening in financial capability and financial education, some of which is supported by provisions in the Workforce Investment and the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and also, a lot of other corporate and foundation initiatives. San Francisco appears to have the most developed and evaluated program, the My Path Savings Program, which includes peer-to-peer education, access to a savings account, development of a savings goal, direct deposit for paychecks, and a savings match. The goal here is to keep young people away from check cashing outlets, and down the line, keep them away from payday lending and other financial services like that. Supporting youth and supervisors to maximize learning and development. And it's important to emphasize that you're supporting both the youth and the supervisors. It's often Harder to focus on the supervisors. But in terms of youth, you've got mentors in Chicago, One Summer Plus, job coaches in Louisville. In Boston, there are career specialists. These all provide guidance to young people and positive adult relationships. They troubleshoot. They also work proactively to help young people adjust to work norms, think about their future. On the supervisor side, some of these same people do a lot to orient supervisors to working with teens who they may not have that much experience with. What are realistic expectations? How do you provide useful and constructive feedback? What are typical roadblocks and how do you address it? Lastly, connecting summer jobs programs to other educational, youth development, and employment initiatives. This 6-week dip into paid employment is a huge opportunity, but no one is blind to the fact that its impacts would be multiplied if it was connected to longer-term services and relationships. But the barriers to doing that, the logistical, funding, organizational barriers are real. But you do see it happening. So for instance, in San Diego, they are creating winter and spring break externships with the goal of using those to prepare for summer jobs. San Francisco changed to reflect this greater emphasis. They changed their name from Summer Jobs Plus to Youth Jobs Plus. They're encouraging a lot of their nonprofits that that run summer jobs programs to stay working with those young people throughout the school year, both pulling from their school year youth into the summer and then feeding their summer participants into the year round. You're going to hear on the panel from an example of this. One of our panelists is in her 4th summer as a summer jobs worker in an organization in which she participated in an after-school program for multiple years beforehand. There's also alignment with career-focused high school programs. In Baltimore, healthcare, career and technical education students are placed in hospitals, jobs related to their field of study, and then what they did last summer was for employers that wanted to keep those young people on throughout the school year, the city continued to subsidize their wages. So that summer job turned into a year-round job. Implementation is the key driver of quality. You may have a beautiful logic model and theory of change, but if you don't have the organization or the staff to carry it out, it doesn't matter. So these are issues relating to, do you have enough staff? Do they have the right training and job descriptions to carry out the program? One program operator described his staff as, quote, a skeleton crew. You need to have, often programs make careful use of seasonal workers to manage surges of work, which is useful, but you have to do additional training for these people every summer. They may or may not have knowledge in working with youth or employment programs. A number of programs do have year-round staff to build and maintain relationships with employers, but those are hard to fund. Secondly, information technology. We heard stories about outdated and inefficient processes, 15-page forms that young people needed to fill out by hand and mail in, job matching processes that involved walking to a file box full of youth applications sorted by zip code to identify likely placements for a given work site, spreadsheets with relevant information that weren't well synced with registration and job matching systems. Creating better information systems can be Herculean, but without them, the core tasks are so painful and so inefficient that many places have decided that it's worth it to push this rock up the hill. To give one example, the San Diego Workforce Partnership custom built a management information system that streamlined their enrollment and their job matching and included a communications function so they could send text messages to their participants, and they dramatically increased their response rate. Lastly, using fairly low-tech tools often, such as sample job descriptions, sample performance assessments, toolkits that are publicly available to help staff work with program supervisors to make this program run well. They bake in quality standards and they codify the accumulated program wisdom. So for instance, the workplace learning tool, and MHA Labs mentioned earlier developed with one of their partners a summer intern growth contract that the intern and the supervisor used at the beginning. Okay, so if you put all this together, what would you find? Here is a proposed vision. The path to employment and economic security for a young person is not always straightforward, especially for young people from low-income and distressed communities. What is the role of a summer jobs program in helping a young person stay on track? It's a valid question. This is a 6-week, relatively low-touch intervention, and a lot of the young people that we're concerned about have needs that require more intensive services. So this vision is designed to provoke dialogue about what's desirable and feasible, and what's the difference between the ideal and what's the difference between what's good enough. Others will improve it, I'm sure. So we said summer jobs should provide a high-quality work experience. Then you have to ask, what is a high-quality work experience? We take a stab at defining that in the paper. They will also serve as a portal to other educational, youth development, and employment services. These are fully building this is aspirational. Fully building this out for any given program would be a major effort, and especially depending on where they're starting from. But without a goal, you don't know where you're going. We designed that vision to complement our recommendations and make them more concrete. First of all, we need a better measure of success than number of youth served. It's readily described, it's readily measured, it can galvanize support and action, but a head count does not answer the most important question, which is whether the young people leave the program better prepared than they entered. Now, tracking young people longitudinally over years is, at this point in time, given existing resources, highly unlikely. Oops, sorry, in most cases. But there are lots of interim, specific, feasible measures that programs can set and be willing to hold themselves accountable. I took this from Louisville. Have as a goal that every participant leaves the program with the name and contact information of an adult who will serve as a professional reference. Measure your progress towards that goal. Measure the participants who improve in their soft skills based on some set of expectations, whether those are designed internally or external, such as the work keys. Measure the attainment of a work readiness credential. Measure the attainment of digital badges. Measure how many young people are from high school, career, and technical education programs who are placed in a summer jobs program related to their field of study. Secondly, as you will have heard in my remarks, there's a theme here about we need to know more. So we need to invest in building knowledge and sharing knowledge, and we can do that in several ways, one of which is in order to track the progress that I just mentioned, programs need better performance management systems. They can't be held hostage to a spreadsheet in one computer that has the data that they need that doesn't talk to the other computer that the other system that they'll be using to report outcomes. It's a big lift, but it's doable, and it's vital. We can support learning communities. The Brandeis Center on Youth and Communities did some of this under a grant with the Walmart Foundation, and these, I think, 6 or 8 communities convened in real life and virtually and They are still networking and learning from each other, although the program has officially ended. Back to implementation, align program staffing and capacity. There is a management article that has the title of "Nobody Ever Gets Credit for Fixing a Problem That Didn't Happen." So, by which I mean the difficulty of directing staff away from the day-to-day grind and providing time and space and resources to develop and assess new approaches. It's hard to do. It's hard to do in the public sector, and it's hard to do in the private sector, but it is doable. Deepen and extend services to both young people and employers. So what this means is both time, building links to services that are before and after the summer, and in some cases, deepening the services that happen in the summer, especially for youth who need more support. This can happen with stronger partnerships with nonprofits and other programs. For instance, in Hartford, Connecticut, a service provider, Our Piece of the Pie, estimates that 60% of the youth they served as a contractor in the summer jobs program were youth they already served throughout the year. So they just transitioned those young people into the summer jobs program. They had the existing relationships, they had the existing plan for education and employment, and summer fed into that quite well. Money. There's a couple things in here. By stabilize the funding base, we are referring to the problem that in many cases, program operators don't know their final budget until late spring for a program in which they will be placing youth in late June. This makes long-term planning very difficult. There's not an easy answer, but with better lines of communication between policymakers, philanthropy, program administrators, this can be improved. As I mentioned, programs are increasingly looking to the private sector to support these programs. And lastly, in order to have these programs really come back, the federal government needs to renew its commitment. One study estimated that the number of participants declined by 50 to 90% after the Workforce Investment Act eliminated the standalone provision for summer jobs. So what we're proposing is a competitive grant process of 5 years, $3 to $4 billion total, for both demonstration grants and planning grants for communities to both expand their numbers and ensure that number of youth served is not the only measure they can report on with confidence. There are more details in the report, but the main thrust is that many communities are just not going to be able to do this if there's not federal support. But we need to remember our lessons about the need for more evidence about what works. Thank you.